Hi everyone, you can hear us okay? Welcome back from lunch. Hopefully you feel a bit recharged. I'm gonna try and jump straight into this because we've got a lot to get through and we've only got 40 minutes. So you've been introduced to my esteemed panelists. They represent all stages of a customer journey as someone goes through the process of registering to an event, to participating in an event, to being tracked and followed, and then seeing images after the event, their photos. Everyone on the panel has a pretty good understanding of data, and what we wanted to do was approach this rather than looking at it from our individual verticals or silos, as you might want to call it, to look at it from an industry perspective and try and understand some of the problems that we have in terms of unlocking the value from data, and then have a really tangible conversation about what some of the solutions might be, so that we can actually go away from this with some clarity over what are the things that we could be spending time on as we go away from the conference. So I'm just going to give a quick background as to where the panels come from. Chris has talked a lot earlier about some of the challenges that we're facing as an industry. You might want to call these kind of pretty aggressive headwinds that we felt during COVID times, where not only was the traditional business model that Chris talked about around ticket sales, sponsorship, grants and others challenged, we also had balance sheets that were pretty aggressively depleted during that period of time. And so we're in a process where if we want to invest in things moving forward, we're not really in a very strong position to be doing it when we think about a rights owner perspective or an event organizer perspective. So there's a bit of context that I just want to look at this from. So if we've got a challenged or broken business model, as it's been talked about, and we've had an industry, if we're being really honest with ourselves, that's been quite slow to change. We're still on a 1.0 business model, I would say, of what we are doing in the industry. How can we look at some opportunities that could be unlocked by looking at data in a different way than we've been looking at it up to today? So I think there's a really interesting piece, which is the value of data and how that can generate value for the industry as a whole and create new business models opportunities. And that's something that I want to dig into today with the panel. So I think the really exciting bit is running as a sport and running events as a product have a consumer that really, really cares about what they do. And they give us a huge amount of data. And they're quite happy to give us that data. So there's a lot of that data that could be used in different ways. Clive Humby, probably no one in this room knows it, maybe some people on this panel know it. He coined a phrase back in 2006. He was a data scientist, a British data scientist, and he talked about data being the new oil, or the oil of the 21st century. It's a phrase that gets talked about a lot in a lot of different industries. But I think there's a really core piece about that analogy that's important. The value of oil is not in its raw format. It's in its processed format, okay, where it's refined. And a lot of the individuals on this panel have a lot of experience with how you can refine data and actually create more use cases out of it. But like oil, refining data has a high barrier to entry. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face when we have a strained business model. You need to have capability from a human resource standpoint and from a technical standpoint, a technology standpoint. You need to have budget to be able to invest in that, okay, to be able to provide that capability. And often you require scale and connecting different data points together to really generate meaningful information, which can then create value. Okay, so in order for us to do that, one of the challenges that I think is we have to start looking at data potentially in a different way and how we can collaborate, as Chris talked about earlier, as an industry and across different silos that may have been created over time through different services that we provide to the industry. So that's the background of this panel. what I'm going to ask our panelists to do now, I've talked for 5 minutes, is to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes giving their perspective on what are some of the problems that they see with how we look at data at the moment. So let's really understand what the problem is. Then let's shift into solution mode and actually go into an ideation process where we try and think about some tangible solutions that we can walk away from this conference with. So that's what we're going to spend the next 30 minutes doing, and then we're going to leave 4 minutes at the end for questions. So I'm going to hand over to Niels first. He's down the end. And I'm going to ask Neil to give his perspective on what some of the problems are that he sees with how we as an industry are looking at data.
Second chance, yes. Yes, thank you for this introduction. Yeah, we see in the market that data is of course important, and we see also these panels organized because we know data is important also for the future of this industry. So the know-how of it is important is step one, and that was maybe the last years also for a lot of events here. They didn't know that they have to do something with it, that the way of saving it, it's important, the way of structure it is important. So we can now move forward to do something with this data, and you was also saying about the value that we can create with it. And I think the challenge that we have nowadays is, okay, how can we also make business out of this? So how can we earn money with this? Who's the customer that are going to pay for this? Is that the athlete itself? Is that the fan? Is it the events that maybe have to pay to get the data, to promote the events? Or of course the commercial partners. And I think that's nowadays the challenge for most events here, with all the rules that are there with GDPR, etc. How can I create value? But after that value, how can I also monetize this value? So I hope we can give some advice in this panel how events can work with that.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Niels. Who wants to go next?
I can go next if I'm
Okay, Stefan.
Hello, hello.
A few technical challenges here.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with your assessment. I mean, the biggest challenge I see is currently the data lives in different silos, and every silo is by itself. It may be the registration company, the timing company, the event. There's no unique identifier which combines all these different data points across time. And I think in the end, combining these different data sources over time might unlock value for the customers. Because me as a runner who participates in different events throughout the year would like to see how I did throughout the year. Might get access to the timing data, how I performed, of the images of all this. But currently this is inaccessible. And if we as an industry find a solution to access all and gather all data in one silo, one data field in compliance with current regulation, I think we can all win.
I think that's a great point. I think if I just summarize there, data sitting in silos is not creating enough value. There's more that could be unlocked. So we need to look at how we can create that horizontal integration across different services. Pierre?
Yeah, so talking from my point of view in terms of registrations, I think one of the problems that we have today is that we're collecting way too many useless information. And it's boring, it's impersonal for participants. They don't understand why they have to answer all these questions in registration forms. And I think it's only because we've been doing this for 20 years and we think we have to carry on and keep it on doing the same way. So I think that would be, for me, the number one problem along what has already been shared and with which I fully agree.
Okay. Nice. Thank you very much. Chiraag?
Hello?
Yep.
Good. I thought the mic was having an afternoon nap right after the lunch. I agree with all of us, I think, in that sense. The first point when we're trying to address over here, as Chris put it in his keynote in the morning, was the business model, right? And where does data fit into that business model? We often find across the region that we're in right now, across Asia, sport, music, gaming, live events in general, we've been going through a 5-6 year sort of change in terms of a mentality towards data. The first stage was collection, and actually collecting data from various sources, first party, then leading or understanding what first party data collection was, then to third party. Subsequently, I think now we're at a stage where like Pierre said, we can be a bit more strategic towards what we're collecting and why we're collecting that. Yeah. I mentioned earlier to you, Sam, as well, that I often find a lot of our clients, we're a B2B company, we work across clubs, federations, governing agencies, and agencies themselves, that it's almost important for them to collect as much data as possible, as opposed to the data which is actually useful to them, right? So we're moving into a different phase where now we're talking about let's collect something which is more recognizable, reasonable, within the purview of whatever legal framework we're in, but how can I then monetize on that moving forward? So it's marrying short-term solutions with data, with a long-term vision or a business plan.
So let's just stay on that quickly. Who should that data be useful for? Like, who are we talking about in terms of the customer?
I mean, you want the data to be useful for the event organizer, sponsors, I mean, all the stakeholders, obviously. But first, you want to make sure that the runner understands why they need to give you that data. Like, why are you asking me for my running club? Why do I have to pick a start wave? Why can't you do it on your own? You know, like, why can't you just like pack people by 300, packs, and then off we go and we do the start wave? You know, we drive too much anxiety in our registration forms because most people don't really care about the start waves in which they're going to be in, most of them,
Jackie?
To add on to that, one of the challenges we see with organizations is that they don't have a data strategy. So there's no plan for the data that they're collecting. We've always asked this, so let's continue to ask it, and not taking a step back and looking at everything you ask and all the data you collect and saying, what are we actually doing with this data? And how are we using it to generate value for our organization? And maybe even more importantly, how are we using it to generate value for our consumers? So I think to date, data has been looked at very operationally. So we need this data because we need it to organize and plan our event. But how do we use this data to actually engage with our participants, engage with our spectators, engage with our sponsors? There's many constituents that are part of your community, and how do we use that data to create additional value for them so that in the long run they continue to patronize our businesses, generate more revenue, increase lifetime value? And then the other thing I'll say is I think we look at data very one-dimensionally, that data is the information a person gives you actively. It's the things they input on your registration forms. But data is much more than that, and we need to transition to a more three-dimensional concept of data, and it's the behaviors a person takes with your organization that also generates data, which I would say is oftentimes even more valuable than the data that they're inputting on your forms. So the first step I would take as an organization is to take a step back, look at the data that you're collecting, both in that one-dimensional format and in that three-dimensional format, and saying, what are we doing with this, and why are we collecting it, and what is the value we can generate from it? And if it's not generating value, you don't need it.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent, very practical and tangible point that we can all take away from that. I'm going to maybe try and helicopter up a little bit. So we've talked a little bit about this from the perspective of an event organizer and wanting to bring people back to our business, okay? What about as an industry and trying to then potentially change some of the commercial models that sit around us as an industry? Have we got any kind of thoughts on what some of the problems might be from that side before we switch to solution mode?
I think when we look to the complete industry, we are talking now about events, but you see also in the complete industry like Strava, all other platforms that already have a lot of data, the industry is way bigger than we have now. So I think the potential in having more participants to the events is big, way bigger than we now service. So I think when we can look to also the complete market of running, and then looking to the data that is already there, when we can make more connection with these environments, getting more insights of this, and what is the value we can deliver to that people that are not participating yet. I think the market is way bigger than we are now. And also, like soccer players, they also have a summer stop, and what they're doing in the summer stop, maybe I can connect with them too. So also in the three-dimensional environment, what Jackie was talking about, I think there's way more data to see, to understand, and to create value on that.
Chiraag?
Sorry, yeah. I was just going to touch upon the problem statement in general, which is low yield when it comes to revenue, especially after COVID, and less participants coming through, which is much more difficult to organize an event in this day and age. And the 4 levers that Chris mentioned, ticketing, sponsorships, grants, if you're lucky, and miscellaneous. I think from a data perspective, there would be 2 ways to look at it. One would be from those 4 levers, how do we augment data to better them? How do we use data to do better when it comes to ticketing or any of the other spheres? And can there be a number 5? Can there be a number 6? Can there be a number 7 lever moving forward? If not today, but tomorrow. And I think if that problem statement is broken down in that way and data's looked to address that problem statement very clearly, not just from the fact that I want to be cool because I have data, but I want to actually use it to monetize and move forward. I think there's a lot that can be done, which is not groundbreaking. It can be done tomorrow.
Okay. So if we kind of try and summarize a few of those points, we've talked about having a data strategy, first of all, as a pretty good starting point, understanding what you want to collect, why you want to collect it, and making sure that you're linking that back to a commercial strategy, I think is some sound principles that we should all be looking at.
I think the order should be at the end, what's the value you want to deliver, and then go back to what you are going to say, because also as Pierre mentioning, we started earlier with just collecting everything, request, you told this Stockholm also, a lot of fields in the form, and we don't need it. So at the end it starts, so what's the value I'm going to deliver, then how am I going to save this, and then what do I need to create this value. So.
Totally agree. And I think the second point, to come back to where we started with Niels and Stefan, was looking at how data is then able to be shared in a compliant way, horizontally, between different service providers that have the ability to enrich a data set around an individual, be it a runner who then participates in an event. Okay, so I think we've covered some of the problems and the challenges that we're facing. What I'd like to kind of spend the next 17 minutes, if we're being precise, is looking at some solutions. And what I'm going to encourage everyone to do is to think practically, but to also think big. Like, let's put out a few ideas that we really think could be things that, as an industry, we might want to be able to get behind, even if we can't solve it immediately. It could be a direction of travel that we're working towards. So who wants to tee this first solution idea off? Pierre, come on, you're grinning.
It's a bold one, but that's what we talked about yesterday, and I want to seize that opportunity to present. It's an idea, a philosophy that we could have as an industry is having an NGB that may not exist today that would offer free user accounts for participants, runners, that they could use to do some single sign-ons to register for events quickly, to check in at events quickly, to aggregate their timing results, aggregate their activities and stuff. And I think as an industry we would benefit a lot by doing something like this,
So let me just try and spell that out clearly, and then I'm going to bring Niels in here because I know he's going to have a point of view on this, which is we're creating effectively a universal ID for a runner, if we want to call it something. And to do that, there has to be a single sign-on solution across the industry, which could be used. Okay, a single sign-on service, which is going to enable you to connect with different service providers.
Yep.
Is going to enable different service providers to enrich the data of that individual profile.
Exactly.
So there's an enriched profile now. Okay, let's think about what some of the challenges might be around that, and then let's think about what some of the opportunities that could be unlocked from that kind of thought process. So, Niels, I'm going to bring you in.
I can follow it up. Yes, a big chance to have one single sign-on platform, but also the big challenge is who is going to create this single sign-on platform, because everybody wants to have his own user ID and want to have his own enriched data. So I think that's also the opportunity that we have here today is, now I think we're here already with 5 persons that maybe have already all this own ID to say together, okay, are we going to collaborate together or not? Now I as a newbie a little bit in this market for 1.5 years, Pierre maybe more experienced. For me it's easier to say, okay, yes, we're going to connect with you all, but I understand for you it's maybe more difficult to make this step. So I hope today we can say, okay, yes, we do this together and we make it practical and we say, okay, how can we match these IDs together? How can we create one sport ID or something for this market? And that we can enrich the people with a really easy single sign-on registration, easy login in the apps for live tracking like we do, so that you can combine and enrich your personal data. Because the data is from the person itself, it's not from us, it's from them. So when we can also give them their own environment where they are in and they can move over this world, yeah, that will be great, of course.
Okay, so that single sign-on is premised across, big word here, interoperability, where we can transfer data across different service providers. What are some of the other benefits that we could get if that was in place? Like, how would it benefit the runner? Let's look at it from the runner's perspective.
I was going to say more back to a challenge. I think runner perception of a shared data set and consumer perception of wanting more control over their data, I think could create some challenges, you know.
So I fully agree with you, and particularly, you know, with a GDPR hat on, we have to ensure that everything is compliant. But if we put permission-based opt-in permissions at the forefront of how this process works, you can overcome that. We're overcoming that at the moment, I would think. There's a perception that needs to be got past.
Yeah, I think there are certainly ways to move through it. I think it's just a big hurdle to jump, you know, and there's already a lot of distrust among companies like Facebook and
Sure.
how they use your data and how they track you and everything. And so I think there's just, not that it's insurmountable, but I think there definitely is a big hurdle to establish that trust and, you know, communicate with consumers how data is being used, how they have control over it, what control they have, who has access to their data. Because some people may not want their information to be shared across multiple entities and multiple organizations. They say, I'm giving my data to your business specifically because I like your business. I may not like this other one.
But we should give them the ability to make that decision. So if that was built in as a feature, then they would be in control of that conversation.
I think it's definitely a possibility, but there's also, you know, even with a feature, you know, unfortunately for us, there's companies out there who have abused that privilege and have created this distrust. So even with those controls in place, there's a perception hurdle that we would have to jump over, even with features in place.
Fully agree, and a totally fair point. Is there additional value that we could transfer back to the runner that might help us regain and rebuild some of that trust? Who wants to go? Stefan, I can see.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say I think there already exists this kind of unique identifier. I think in most cases, at least what we found out, is an email address. The email address works for many parts. Somebody signs up with the registration company, this email gets passed to the event, gets passed to different vendors. It works. It doesn't have to be precise every single time, but I'm sure it's 95% accurate in most cases. Some people do change this email address over time, obviously. But I think this can only work. There does need to be a new platform or identifier to be created, which might take some time to educate the consumer. But what we just said in the beginning, we all agreed on, if we do have this identifier, it's just easier for me as a consumer to find out, you know, my history as an athlete. I think I would be really keen to understand what I did over the last 20 years. Currently, it takes me a lot of effort to find out. It takes effort to see where I did run, what times I did. how I perform with whom I ran. And if I can access this information in an instant, this would personally give me extra value.
So currently at the moment, I guess most of us, if we were looking back at history of activity, we'd look at a Strava record that we might have, or we might look at our Garmin or another smart device that we have. But often that doesn't then help us tell that story of our event day journey and the journey up to the event, which is, I think, all of us in this room are kind of involved in providing storytelling around that live tentpole experience, which is such an important moment within people's active journeys. So how do we as an industry kind of take control of that rather than have it sit in another platform that doesn't really want to play nicely in the sandbox with us? Any other thoughts?
To address the first point, I think what the runner might benefit or participant might benefit is from a lot of personalization. I think simple things are not being done in the right way. Not just looking at your photo or tracking your loved ones, but simple things as you've attended the last 3 years for this particular event. Come back the next year. This is what we're doing differently. This is how we're structuring it. These are the changes that you would see from last year versus this year. These are small things that can be done, and the participant will see value in that moving forward. But what I was trying to address is what you said was, how do we think big? I think one step in terms of thinking big is to think small, or taking small steps. Looking at examples in other industries and other sports where 5-6 years ago they were having the same kind of problems, right? We have a loyal base, however, we do not know how to engage with them, and we do not know how to subsequently monetize moving forward. Engagement is a means towards the next step, but it's an extremely, extremely important step. You need to know your consumer base or your customer base. At the end of the day, these are B2C organizations. If you do not know your customer base, how are you going to be able to succeed and grow? So when I say small, I'm talking about simple things, not just in terms of data collection, but how am I engaging with them? How am I personalizing content? Am I being able to build segments and behavioral patterns and send out marketing activity through emails, SMSs, whatever it might be, depending on the region that I'm at. So there are a lot of things that can be done that is not tremendously out of the box. There's simple things which are within the box, which have been there for a long time. I'd love to talk about Web3 and everything else, but I think there's still a lot of stuff that big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning, words that we've stopped using, that we can potentially use, because they're technologies that an industry like this can still very much benefit from.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Jackie?
I would just say I completely agree with that sentiment that, what other industries have done really well over the last decade is know their consumer and craft very personalized and tailored engagement opportunities so that they can foster stronger relationships that bring those consumers back to spend more money with them. If you look at organizations like the NFL or the NBA or the English Premier League, they really know who their consumers are and they speak to them in highly tailored ways. So the way they talk to a new fan who's never been to a game before but is at their first game is going to be very different than the way they talk to a loyal fan who has season tickets. Sure. So I think, and the data is there. The data is already there. Maybe in some of the platforms you use, I know that's one thing our platform does, is give you the access to that data and then to actually execute on these activities. Is very highly personalized engagement touch points, whether it's email or social or SMS, content. Take a step back and look at the way that you're engaging with your consumers, and if it's generic across the board, it's not segmented, that's a really great place to start.
Yeah,
Sorry. Don't get me wrong. Building a collective is great theoretically, and a lot of industries have tried it, but when it goes to a stage where the collective might make sense initially, or data sharing might make sense initially, regulators and everything have come in, and we've seen this in different industries, then it becomes an extremely difficult task to kind of unwind and take a step back and say, okay, I own this data, you own that, etc. So there are short-term solutions before we can get there.
Sure. No, I think it's a great point that KYC should be permission to play. It should be, the basics that we do. I think one thing that I would just circle back on is one of the problem statements that we have, which is a strained business model that relies on the rights owner, the event organizer, whoever that might be, to have that capability to be able to do it and to be able to have the expertise and the tools to be able to do that, which costs money. They've got to pay for it. And in an environment where business models and break-even points are becoming more and more strained, something that should be basics and you should have are things that people are not doing. Now, that is a reality, and I think what will happen is people who are able to do that stuff will survive, and what we'll do is we'll have, over the next couple of years, a large number of smaller organizations that'll die, and maybe that's free market economics. I guess one of the things that I wanted to think about as an industry perspective is, could we look at changing the way that funding model is ultimately working? And could data be something that we could look at in a different way because of the value of that data across the industry? If we could think about that business model in a fundamentally different way, could we have a different path moving forward?
The challenge I see with that is that there are so many events across the world. This isn't like an NFL or an NBA where you may have 36, 32 teams and they have a revenue share model, and it makes a lot of sense because there's a limited number of players in the market. And having a collective makes each one more powerful. In this industry, there's just so many events and so many organizations. It would be I just see a big challenge in having a more collective funding model, like something like the NBA or MLB or something like that. So I think just the sheer size, and not necessarily size and number of runners or number of fans, but size and number of organizations that are putting on events, and new ones are popping up every day. They're merging, they're breaking apart, new events are being created, some are going away, and new types of events are coming into the market. 10 years ago, you saw the introduction of more like obstacle type challenges like Spartan and Tough Mudder. So I think just the rate at which the industry is changing and the size in terms of number of organizations, number of events presents a big challenge for that.
I
Niels?
think we can. I think we can change this world because when we start with small steps that just mentioned, is starting with understanding your participants and understanding your fans, you're going to see new values. So it's also not scared then anymore to create new business models, because I'm going to deliver value to him, and I know I can ask money for this. But I think this market is still a little bit on the old side that is scared to ask money for this kind of items. But I think when you know who are there, who is your fan, who is your athletes, you're going to see that you are creating real adding value, and then also don't be scared to ask money. And then we can change the world. But yes, that's the first step. Don't be scared and do it.
Okay. Stefan?
Yeah, I think this industry has great opportunity. What we see here in developing countries is these societies rapidly getting obese. The Western countries where we come from, rapidly getting old. They're graying. There's a $1 trillion health market, and I don't think we as an industry don't do a good job at delivering a message that we are part of the solution for this health business. This industry is pocket change for the health market. And getting more funding from the health market and governments, I think, is part of our solution going forward. Because I do believe that creating a healthy lifestyle, our athletes are role models, and encouraging more people to take part of this is part of the solution in the future.
Okay. I think we're coming up to 5 minutes. I just want to kind of conclude, and then we'll open up to the floor. I think it's a really kind of positive point that you're leaving us on, Stefan, and I think if I'm to maybe kind of summarize that point, like the true value of the product that we all represent, is about how we inspire physical and mental fitness en masse. That's a pretty powerful product that we represent as an industry. And that remains largely unfunded, in my opinion, by both the private and the public sector. So if we can reimagine how we can tell that story, and data can be a core way in which we really validate that, then potentially we could have a completely different conversation around those business models. And that's the, I guess, the exciting future I'd like us to think about. Okay, we've got 4 minutes left. Have we got any questions from the floor? If not, we can keep talking about data.
Maybe someone on the floor that is doing this already and can give an example from how they do that. Maybe it's one event that can show that. So that's directly what you see. It's new, so we must go with small steps. I think now we service a lot of events together that's making some steps, so that's good. But hopefully next time when I do that question again, everybody will stand up because they have a great example. Yeah. So I hope we can inspire that today.
I would just like to add that it's not just based on the organizer or the rights holder. We as tech companies also have to take on responsibility. Responsibility from the perspective that we need to understand the business model, the challenges within the business model. If that means that we've got to give the industry a chance to do better and monetize ourselves a bit less, so be it. Because this is an industry, the space where there's so much passion when it comes to its running, regardless of where it is, COVID or no COVID. If you've been a runner and you enjoy participating, you will keep going back and you will influence the next generation. Beautiful story about Chris and his son, right? So that keeps happening, and we've got countless stories like that. So as tech providers ourselves, we need to take on responsibility to also aid the industry in terms of the small steps that we're talking about.
Nice. Anyone else? Any parting words? No? Well, I'd like to thank my... Oh, we got a question. Here we go.
Have the, did you hear everything, or do we need to ask again?
Sorry. You start again.
Of course, sorry. The question is, who needs to become responsible for that data? You mentioned there tech companies becoming responsible, but if I register for Ironman, I now have active emailing me for the next 2 years because I have an account. Less so with a lot of the big events, because the events take responsibility, but especially in that mid-size event, I'll have maybe the registration platform emailing me. I'll have the event organizer emailing me. I'll have the results and timing emailing me. You talked earlier, Jaclyn, about distrust in the participants. I think a lot of it comes from that not knowing where the data belongs. And maybe that comes in having a single identifier and platform to align all of those. And Chris, forgive me for the sake of being abrasive right now, yesterday I got an email from Hoover about this conference before I'd signed up for the app. Now, that's not a bad thing. I had intentions to anyway. But again, for some people would raise that question, hang on, where's that data going? So who needs to take responsibility there moving forwards?
I truly believe that the people that should own the data are the consumers themselves. Now, that means that they're still giving you their data, but they should have the power to rescind it. They should have the power to say, I don't want you to use this anymore. I'm also, and my company Haku is also of the mindset that as technology companies, well, maybe not so much you all, but maybe us three here, we have no business emailing you. You'll never receive an email from Haku because there's no reason to. We're simply empowering event organizations to engage with you in ways that generate value for you. So if you don't live in Miami, Florida, or you don't live in the US, why would you receive an event about a 5K in 2 weeks from now in Miami, Florida? So as a technology provider, we should be providing the organizations the features and functionality they need to create value for you from the data you've given them. So again, long answer, I'm going to make it shorter, is consumers should own the data. Organizations should be able to have access and use that data as long as they're generating value.
I think also in case of connecting with them is the event. You connect with the event, and that you want to be part of, and you want to be part of that journey. So I think the event must deliver you the best journey that they can deliver you before, during, but also after the event. So.
Okay, I think we've run out of time. Thanks very much for that question. Thank you very much to my fellow panelists, and hopefully you've enjoyed learning a little bit about data.